It's a pleasure for me to welcome you. It's not an ordinary evening for us because it's the first time we hold an event in this beautiful Teatrino since the lockdown. So it's the reopening of this beautiful place devised by Tadawando. By the way, it's also my first appearance, so to speak, since François Pinault asked me to take over the Palazzo Grassi after Martin Bettenot, who is among us tonight, left for Paris. So this evening is dedicated to one of our shows, which is currently on view, Punta della Dogana, entitled 2020, Three Perspectives of the Art of the Present. Because of the regulations, the sanitary regulations, only two people can take place on the stage. You have on the stage Caroline Bourgeois, who is one of the curators of the show, Angela Vettese, who is art critic, historian, also teaches at UAV University in Venice. Muna Fituri will join the conversation from the United States. I'm also very pleased to welcome at least two of the artists present in the show who have been able to attend this evening, Alice Kettel and Kasia Sudakovsky. Perhaps one or two other will join us later. So, who is Hélène Delprat is also joining us, so I welcome her warmly. I take advantage of this opportunity to thank the staff of Palazzo Grassi, who have realized the show in quite difficult circumstances, and thanks to them we can now enjoy this wonderful display. So now it's time for the conversation to take place. Angela, Caroline, the floor is yours. Buona serata, bonne soirée à tous.
May I say a few words before? We were three to conceive, to live, to challenge the show together. Unfortunately, either Muna and Fituri or Thomas Ausiago were not able to come due to COVID, so they never saw the show in flesh, including Muna, who's going to join. I sent them images of the in situ work. But it has been a lot of tournament period, so I want to thank them, and it's not because they're not there, they're not there with me and in the show, and that everything has been discussed, every artist has been discussed, every work has been discussed with during our last meeting in flesh, which was in November. So just to congratulate them too.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you also to Bruno Racine. I think we all have to welcome him as a new director of Palazzo Grassi. And we are sure that the program will be as challenging as always. And so let's go immediately to the show. The show is the second show, which is, correct me if I am wrong, is the second show which is curated also by an artist, actually by two artists. And so it is creating sort of a tradition for Palazzo Grassi to have the strong presence of artists in the organization and planning, creating a project for a show, which is really fantastic, given that it looks like the artists are part of the system, but not the center of the system, which is weird, because at the beginning of everything in the contemporary art, or in any kind of art, there is the artist. So I really appreciate this way of putting the artist in the middle of the scene once again, even if with the help and with the wisdom also of a curator like you. So actually what comes out of from a show which is curated by artists too is something much less predictable and much more distracted, I would say, than what we normally see in curated by curators shows. So somehow there is a structure, but there is also a kind of freedom that you can smell once you walk through the show. And actually, it is a structure that is created by a number of topics. But these topics are random, or looks like random, and they are really one after the other, more or less in the same way our thoughts come one after the other in our heads. So it looks like a dream, a way of thinking, a free way to leave your mind do his job all alone somehow, with no pretense of a logical structure. And so I will start by reading you all the topics, because this is really an interesting list. Standing, sex, the beginning of painting, death, mourning, elemental, whole, sex, rock and roll, engagement, Roxy's, the studio, love is the message, labor, eyes, Americans, utopia, male, domesticity, loss. So I suppose that all these topics are the result of a negotiation between the three of you. And so, Caroline, tell us something.
First, thank you for what you said about the idea of it is like in your head. That was what we wanted to risk, in a way. We all took risk to have a body, a physical, a feeling in the exhibition instead of a demonstration, and to give the contradiction that all of us has always. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one. I made crazy dreams during the, usually, but during the COVID, we all make crazy dreams, and this is also a kind of free way to think or to behave, including the contradictions. And that was something we really discussed together, and that's why we didn't put benches on the show. We wanted something which was more familiar. We pushed the details with chairs, and we were pushing each other during the discussion to be more crazy or creative or whatever word I could not exactly examine. And the idea of titles for the rooms were very, since the beginning also, with all those things that we keep thinking in any question in life, which could be a public discussion or a private relation, and the dynamic that it can give. So that was something which was very much part of it. The beginning, as we had a lot of discussion with Thomas and Muna in time, and they came often to see a lot of exhibitions in Venice too, so we were already used to discuss together. The choice of Thomas maybe to start also, it's because it's an artist which is in the collection since quite a while, as it was with Jan Vo, but it's very different than Jan, which is more conceptual as a way of thinking, even if the meaning of the show appeared during the making. With Thomas, it's something which is a lot more we had a discussion, which I still remember in 2011 with him, which is really engaged even with the body of the way of speaking. So the tone, in a way, was given. And then at the beginning, Thomas wanted to include like big figures like Giacometti, Picasso, and we decided together that it was not the risk of that show, that was too obvious, that we could keep in the library, in the studio, all those references, that we didn't need to prove that we knew them, but that we needed to take risk with less known artists, and we didn't want also to have anything chronological, and two other decisions, all right, which was to involve a lot of women artists, but without pointing them just as women, as well as Afro-American artists without pointing them, but as part of the discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. It's also really topics that, you know, an artist will continually think about. I mean, these are very, very primal topics, right? Death, mourning, you know, these are the experiences of life. And so if you look at it, there is a flow, because it starts in a very, you know, it's almost like birth to death, you know, and then the cycle begins again, because you start with standing, you know, and then sex is immediate. You know, there's a determination of male or female, or, you know, now the multiplicity of genders. You know, then death is always present. You know, the process of mourning is always present. So if you look at any artist's works, you know, if you look at the whole kind of body of work, you will see all of these themes. And so it's almost like a walk through the psyche of an artist. And so, I mean, to me and Thomas and Caroline, it made total sense. You know, there's a very sort of logic in it that's not a mind over body logic. It's a mind, emotion, and body logic, all three of them being on an equal plane. In terms of the inclusions, you know, I agree with Caroline. It was about, for me, it was about the destruction of hierarchy. You know, I grew up looking at, you know, German Gothic art, you know, Arabic art, and all of it was on the same plane in a way. And that's what we tried to do in the show, is to really look at the works and not who made them, and not engage in any particular kind of stream in terms of, like, this wasn't a feminist exhibition. This wasn't a kind of white male, you know, tradition exhibition. It wasn't an exhibition of, you know, people of color or African Americans. It was an exhibition of pure art, in the way that I look at art, in the way that Thomas looks at art. It's just art without any kind of tags attached to it.
It looks pretty much as a show about how art takes its place, how art comes out from the mind, the hands, and the spirit of the artists, but also how an artwork can create a discourse with another artwork, or many artworks can chatter one with the other. So
Right.
also the temperature, in this way, the emotional temperature of the show increases compared to the, let's say, normal show where a certain topic is like at the center of, at the conceptual center of the whole thing. So I see something that has to do with our emotional side, which has a lot to do with what we are living now, what we are witnessing now. Although the show was prepared starting from 10 years in advance. So somehow it came at the right moment, at the moment in which we all had to face our emotional side. So somehow not being a show on emotions, it's a show which also creates a lot of emotional responses in the viewers.
Yes.
I hope. Muna?
No, and, you know, and on this, I mean, I was thinking when you were talking that it's really a journey into the unconscious in a very Jungian way, right? It's and exactly, I mean, that was a real surprise, and yet it's something that, you know, artists struggle all the time with. Like, where does this creativity come from? Are we channeling something? Is it coming from, like, this kind of, you know, collective unconscious, or what? And that's exactly what happened to us as the events sort of developed from 2019 to 2020. We realized that the show was really on topic. It's exactly what's happening right now. So there's some kind of strange temporal, you know, almost distortion with this sense of collective unconscious, you know, and you see that so many times in the kind of works artists produce. And then there's a moment when it's shown, it completely clicks into that reality of the moment, you know, and I feel like we've somehow captured that. And it's also, you know, one of the things that, and I am coming before the show closes, somehow, some way. One of the interesting things is we could have hung it many different ways, you know, and there's something very fluid about the hanging and that discussion between works. Now, that's a really tricky one because you can fall into a very kind of intellectual and didactic situation where it's all about the conversation between the works. And for me, it was really important to make sure that the works stand on their own. There's something about, you know, kind of a respect for the artist where it's not, you know, there is a dialogue, but there's also like that pulling back and the work as a standalone from that artist, that voice of that artist to be respected. Not as part of a thematic situation, but as part of a, you know, you really communicate with each artist separately. And then there's a moment where they all speak together, you know, and that sort of dialogue in the show, I mean, there's so many ways, you know, and I was thinking maybe in the future, it would be interesting to hang something where you sort of move the works around. You know, it's the same works, but somehow as, I don't know, as the exhibition progresses, as things change, to add a fluidity with that. I mean, it's a little bit of a crazy idea, but it would reflect in a way what we tried to do here, you know, to keep a sense of flow, to keep a sense of energy.
But we did work a lot, with the
Yeah.
echoes
Yeah.
in between the works and the echoes on the journey of the show. I mean, when you go through, there's some, for example, the Second World War influence, it comes back. Hiroshima comes back. Things which question the common problems we all have to fight and how individuality can answer, as well as there's a lot of a link with surrealism on my point of view, which appears,
Yes, absolutely.
which is the opposite of a kind of, comment on dit en anglais? It's against rationality, that's for sure. It's something to allow to be unrational in a wild way, and that we pushed each other on that sense, including, so in the studio, there's a wall where we replicate how we did work together to place and to see how it was in dialogue in between, even if we had, of course, the wish to respect each of the works to be able to speak, but to speak even louder, in a way, to the others.
I also think that, it is an anti-Cartesian show, if you want, so against rationality. It's also a show where you can absorb the sound of every single artwork or the flavor of every artwork in their own way and method and technique of making, which is not irrelevant, because what you see in shows that are curated also by artists is a certain attention for the making of the artwork itself. And so I'm thinking to the first two big artworks that you see once you get in the first room. The Big Boy, The Standing Boy by Thomas Auseago, and then The Red Disc by Magdalena Bakanovic. So you are faced with these two completely different things, and one is a male and the other is clearly referring to the genitals of a female. And one is done with iron, with plaster, with something that is like male-oriented, and the other is done with, knitting or with a textile procedure. And I know that she would knit on her body, because Magdalena Bakanovic was obliged to keep on her body the whole surface of the sculpture, because she was under pressure because of censorship. So she would hide what she was going to create. And like a Penelope, a strange Penelope in the communist Poland, that was in the 70s. And so the two works are saying more or less the same thing. Look what I am. Look at me. I am a big, fragile man with aspects also of solidity, if you want. But basically, I'm standing in front of you with all my weaknesses. And the same thing, like I am a woman with her fragility and with her like strength also, the strength of going on also in creating a forbidden thing. And the two things have a wonderful dialogue, like a male, female, a iron, textile, a non-colored, colored dialogue. And this creates like something that reflects also in the other artworks that are all around. So I was wondering, how did you decide, according to which method you decided to put the artworks together, the three of you?
Una, do you want to start or I start? Well,
Why don't I start? Because Caroline will take it home after me. I mean, for me, I think the three of us have an encyclopedic knowledge of a lot of the works, you know. Magdalena Bakanovic, I'm half Polish, right? So she was really important to me for, you know, forever, really, since I was little. And, you know, I always read about her. I looked at her work. You know, there was something, I lived with it in my head, right? And of course, living with Thomas, I have really kind of internal view of what his process was. And so that's exactly, I mean, that, you know, it's a beautiful sort of, you picked a really interesting, you know, kind of dynamic, because that's exactly it. We really wanted to just look at some of these works in a way that felt that we got in them. You know, it wasn't a look at the surface of them, but it was a look at the creation of them. And, you know, there was a very playful element in it. Once we sort of chose the artists and the works, we started to really, you know, kind of dive into what they are, what they really are at the core. And, you know, another room that has a real kind of mirroring is Lynne Fuchs and Betty Sarr. And that room has become more and more relevant because of what's been going on politically, socially, you know, and with the pandemic. And what I love about that room, and I'm still trying to get my head around it and understand exactly, you know, what happens in that room, is how fluidly the dialogue between the two sort of bodies of work happens. And here you have sort of a white male from California, from the West Coast, and a Black woman from the West Coast who are, you know, who were working at the same time, who were looking at these same events, you know, who were actually living in the same sphere. And yet, sort of no one puts them together. And yet in a city like LA, they were together, you know, or in California, it was, you know, they existed in that same space, you know, and in a way, you know, if you sort of transcend time, Thomas and Magdalena lived in the same space of that body exploration of what it means to stand on your own two feet, what it means to hide and disclose, what it means to deal with your personal trauma or your social trauma. And that is one of the sort of, for me, that's where the heart is in the show, is that sort of delicate look into both the artist as a human being and then the artist as this creative being that transcends, you know, sort of our human reality in a way. So that's my 2 cents on this one.
What I could quite translate is that we really, for example, the work by Thomas, he was not sure of if it was a work. And Muna and I, we said, yes, it's a work. So we pushed him to declare that sculpture finished, and we pushed him to have it as the first thing you see, to show that we all take risk by showing who we are in the way of choosing the works, or Thomas choosing his this strong but fragile work, also very transparent in a way. And on Magdalena Bakanovic, we all agreed, but it became super difficult to find, and we wanted that well, in between, because now the Tate proposed her a show finally, so it became very, so we had to really fight to get that kind of work we wanted from that series, obviously. And she's more a monument than Thomas in the show, and that's also what we try to question ourselves, how we change our kind of pre-knowledge. So that was the risk, that we decided to take. Or the last work in that room that we decided at the end, later on, because we had some problems sometimes with some works, is Teresa Burga, not because of her, we were against pop and kind of pop culture. We were against Warhol and company. We didn't want that at all in the exhibition. But the position of Teresa Burga, it's a need to speak louder in Bolivia. So it's a very different way to use those colors, and she doesn't speak about consumerism, but speak about how it's difficult to stand up in life, and as a woman, probably even in a stronger way.
Something else that I've noticed is that there is a vague in art history and art criticism right now, since 10 years at least, which is called Anachronism, and that has to do with putting one work with something quite different, also in terms of seeing where it comes from, like cinema and visual arts, but also science and, design. And all of this happens with no relation to the historical time, like taking for granted that there is a collective unconscious that repeats some symbolic forms, and this has been created as a way of thinking, sort of mindset by Aby Warburg, and this is something that is becoming sort of, I would say, academic. In many shows, you see this same way to go on, which has something fantastic because it is always inspiring, but also it's a little bit too heavily against history. And I think that you succeeded in putting together different artworks with no respect from the, let's say, at least age of the artist. No, young and old artists, male and female, and so on. Also East and West. So putting together with a big amount of freedom all these aspects, but always keeping the point. And the point looks to me like something that has to do with our standing, like the need of staying alive and the need to find countermeasures to to fight all our weaknesses. So is it something that can describe the show?
Well, Muna will also speak, but that's how to survive. I mean, and that was obviously without saying, but our subject since the beginning. And how to survive is to keep distance or go in, and that's the question you have every day. And when we start in life, which there's a moment you have to kill to live, not in a symbolic way, of course, which is to start to say yes. You have to say no before, and that's the subject of the show. And to be able to do that is to accept with the weakness. To agree. You cannot be free without agreeing with the weakness you are, or not being aware. So, for me, it was, we were very concerned by people who agreed to be singular, not depending so much on we all depend in relationship, but not waiting to be agreed to go. So, maybe in your words, Muna?
Yes, I mean, that's a really wonderful point. You started by saying, this sort of dynamic that goes against history. And for me, it was really important to very delicately look at what history is, right? Because history has been up until now from one particular point of view, right? And it's transmitted through these writings that then become truth, right? And as, the geography sort of is expanding, there was that moment of realization that there are many histories and that, these points of view sort of contradicted each other based on, that sort of human desire to be correct and to be the truth as opposed to being, subjective. And so here, what we try to do is very delicately sort of start to unpack this idea of one history. And that has created this sort of platform in which all of these histories coexist. And not one of them is truth. All of them are truth. And all of them are equally as valid and equally as weighted. And so that was really important. And, to Caroline's point on how to survive, this is kind of almost a message of, yes, there's surviving. And then if you sort of transcend that, you learn how to live, and living is really, no matter where we are, no matter what is going on historically, or politically as now, there is a way to go from surviving to living. And I think artists have a way of doing that, even if they don't feel it, even if it's a total struggle, they are closest to living than to surviving. And that is an absolute, that to me is perfection, So, yes, the juxtapositions are really quite free, but they're also really thought through. This show, we really thought through every single piece, every single positioning, hanging, why they were interacting, how well they were interacting. Was it really towards this idea of a kind of multiplicity of subjective truth? One of my favorite rooms, and Caroline can speak to that, is the sex room. Because, there are a lot of, this whole idea of exposing the body and exposing sex in a sort of Western lineage. So much of it has been about, men sculpting women, painting women, photographing women. And what we realized we did without really thinking it through, and yet, once we did it, we went back and kind of created sort of a structure for it, which was a lot of the works are sort of male bodies, nude male bodies, and they are done by women. And so there was this inversion of what you show, what becomes the muse, what becomes sort of the object in the end. And that's something that Helen Molesworth, in our sort of dialogue in the book, really, really sort of honed in on, and that's kind of what we did in this show. I think we just sort of flipped it. It's a different way of looking at works.
Tried.
We tried, yes. I hope we were successful.
It's also in speaking about life, I mean, living, being alive, going back to life, is also interesting to look at the names of the artists, because many of them are just starting to live in terms of being a successful artist, but some of them, more interestingly maybe, are coming back to life. One of these is Eduardo Chilida, who is, of course, a great sculptor. Nobody doubts his value, but it has never been put in a show related to the last movement. So it's something weird to find Chilida within such a show. But I would say that also somebody who has been part of the avant-garde, like Valley Export, is something, and Valley Export's works are coming back and back and back within the show several times. Somebody like Valley Export brings up something that we are trying to forget. Performance and photographs about performances, and something that has to do with gender, started very early in the 60s and was much more provocative than it is now. So we are now facing a performance art and a gender-oriented art, which is really mild if we compared it with what happened in the 60s and 70s. And young people should know this. So somehow you are also recreating a new life for some of the artists in the show.
On Valley, I would like to take the talk. Valley, the question about surviving and living is super strong in her life. She was a woman married, and she did at that time some incredible violent drawings that she could not live that life. She was going to die if she was still a married woman with a kid. She still has a kid, but with a kid. And she changed, and that's how she became an artist. It's because she could not be someone else, to allow herself to get out of that cage, up to change her name. But it's the violence who made of the society, where she was, in Vienna, maximum masculinity in Vienna, who pushed her as far as she did, including the performance Walking the Man as a Dog, including body cinema, where it's to touch her boobs that makes the image. And so at the beginning of the exhibition, also we were wanting to have two super engaged women, black and white, and it turned that with finished with Valley for X reasons. This is a construction. There's always something we change on the way. But she also had only outside to do anything. As Jonas at the time, as a lot of women, it's also the woman who used the videos at the beginning because it was not an object of attention, of art, of commerce. Same thing, Valley. She survived because of the teaching, and for years she was not seen at all. So she, in a way, expressed, and that's why we put twice the poster of Genital Panic, because it's also to see how far, and I agree, compared to today, she went. Genital Panic, if someone didn't saw the show, sorry. It's a performance she made in 1969 where she cut her jeans to show her pubis, and she came into a cinema with a gun, with a huge gun. And she did the posters to advertise in the streets, which I cannot imagine the scandal at the time. But it was a very radical jest.
Yeah. And the sex room carries that energy. You know, we really pushed it with the genitalia because it was, in a way, that's what we realized. We realized that somehow in the last, I would say probably like 20 years, there was this kind of sanitization, you know, and this kind of isolation of works that deal with sexuality, with our presence as, you know, sexual beings, with genitalia, with, you know, kind of all that dimensionality, that it was almost like, oh, that's a special room. Oh, you know, or it's a different show, or, you know, that kind of isolation. And we wanted to bring that back in because it is part of, you know, sort of the geography of art. And it has to be included in this way that, thanks to the 60s, we had this beautiful map of how to navigate that, you know. So it was a room that came together very easily and very fluidly because, you know, these women had paved the way for us to be able to have this discussion in the way we do in the show.
I would go downstairs and I would go to the studio because we mentioned it very briefly, Caroline did. But this show has as a core place the studio of the artist, or the reconstruction of the studio of the artist, Thomas Auseago, with all the books coming from the shelves of his library, and with all the sofas and the possibility to stay there and the possibility to relax, but also to think, to compare, to redesign the show itself, as if, number one, the artist is somebody who is alive, so this means that the artwork is not dead. He can always change it, and he can always go on with the process. Number two, we are part of this process, and we can change the artworks. We do change them once we put our gaze on them, and this is the normal process of like perceiving an artwork. But we also can change the artworks through our reactions. Maybe the next time that artwork will be shown in another way, or like within another context, because it was clear that in that context was like possible to give another perspective. So somehow I see time passing by. I see a process that this show suggests, like the artwork as a process, perceiving an artwork as a process, but the show itself somehow as a process that is part of time, lives within time. There is a wonderful artwork which is by Ray Nato, where you have to change. It's a vase with a flower, and you have to change the flower every day. And this is a wonderful way to talk about, to express the idea of time. So somehow it is a never-ending show. It is an ongoing show. So, I mean, this is my impression. I would like to have yours.
On my side, thanks, Angela, for that, because it was what we tried or wanted. It's also the time of thinking. It's a space, that was the first decision we had made when we started the project, to change the cube, which is that gigantic space in the Dogana, as something which is more intimate, which is more personal, and which shows the process, how to make the studio by Thomas and the photos of Muna. You show how the work was done, and the billboard with all the images of the works in the exhibition shows how we made the decision, how we put them together, as well as what we thought of with all the books of the people which are in or not in. We were in a long discussion. And we wanted to offer, it's a bit more difficult with the COVID and the fear than it should have been in the principle, that people could redo the show as they want on the board too. And we did discuss even the show in the studio of Thomas, which it became a sculpture now. So it's, to give that kind of dream moment, and that anyone has right to think or to change or to do, that we are not just the people knowing at all. We are with our weakness, and we wanted to share that since the beginning.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, I mean, it's an interesting space, because what it is that it pushes you to question certain things, such as, there's that idea of the white male artist as this kind of lone wolf, right? And it's not really what it is. I mean, yes, artists need a private space, but they're really in a world. The studio has many, many layers. It's the place where you make work, it's the place where you think, and it's also it's a communal space. It's a space where you can create community. It's a space of truth, because that's really, and it's hidden most of the time. So, yes, there are studio visits, there are all sorts of things happening, but, there's both that idea of being alone in there and thinking through and changing and recreating. And there's this idea of you are not necessarily alone in there, no matter what the outside perception is, And we wanted to begin to breach that idea of that sort of lone suffering artist, that, it's the stuff of films. I mean, that's been reinforced, and it's a little more complicated than that. And so that space sort of serves both. It really talks about a sense of community, and at the same time, the process of making work. That can be a lone process, or it can be a communal process of discussion of ideas, discussion of where the work is going, influences through books, through research, through just, sitting and thinking, and making, and so it kind of covers all that. And what was also nice about it is that, it gives you a break, because the show is really intense, as you mentioned, the intensity keeps on increasing. And we felt that, or especially me, I felt that museums can be very uncomfortable. And it's almost, there's a moment of fatigue that happens. And at that moment, you want to just kind of run away. And then there's that other moment that happens where you don't want to miss the rest. And so we felt that it would be nice to have at the center a place where you can just sit and regroup and think through and rest, and then you know, continue on. And it's a space that's comfortable, that's sort of, you know, it does fire you up. You know, you can kind of really get a second wind energy, but it also can be very restful. And so in an artist studio, there is always that space of where you can go and sit and, you know, kind of take a break, kind of recharge, but also wind down. And it's a place, you know, it's at the center. So you can go at any point in the show. That's your decision. You know, you can kind of, you know, go in, come back out, keep looking at the works in the different rooms, go back in, take another break, come back out, you know. And so that is a fluidity that I was always looking for in a museum. And so, you know, we created that in a way that feels not only true to the exhibition, but also to support, you know, the viewer in a way through creating a safe space almost.
And we shared, we evoked this way all the discussion we had, which I don't know if it's in the spirit of the room, but in between us, but also with a lot of others. And that's part of the process, any process.
And then one last thing, because I see some artists which are here, and probably they will have something to say or could be willing to say something. So I feel that this show is a sort of unpolite show. Although it is very polite, but it is not polite, inasmuch it shows us the dead bodies of Marlène Dumas, for example, within the coffins, or these open legs of Valley Export, or the broken body made of two parts, one painting, one sculpture of Enrico David, or sketches by Henry Moore about the scandal of the war and the necessity to go and refugee within the underground places. And this has to do with like staying alive once again, the necessity to protect yourself, but in a very weird way. I mean, one body on top of the other and staying all together, not in a ritual situation, but in a situation that has to do with necessity. And I could go on and on, because the majority of the artworks that are part of this show deal with something that has to do with the scandal. And the big scandal of the show is Roxy, the Edward Kennels installation, which was a true scandal when it came out, and it obliged the artist to change town, to change his way of life. And it was about soldiers, a brothel, prostitutes conceived as sex machines which were necessary though, and so abused, but also really necessary to the survival, the psychological survival of the soldiers. And so all these contradictions, also this dust, this bad taste, trying to reach a good taste, and also this uterus, this womb. And so the place where we were born is not a clean one. The place where we were like developing ourselves, our unconscious, if you want, is not a clean place. It's not polite. It's something that has to do with also dirty things. So, okay, I came out from this wonderfully crafted show, if you want, with all the captions well done and so on. But still, there was some dust on me. So some dirt on my shoulders. So I didn't want to take it out. I think that the aim of the show should be to invite people to take consciousness, to be conscious of the dust we all have on our shoulders. And so, I don't know, is there dust in this show?
A lot,
Yes.
sorry. But it's not so much compared to what we read every day about our society. I mean, it's not so much. It appears, it's not a direct condemnation. And it's also, we have to be with it. The most dust one is also the Bruce Corner movie with the atomic test in Bikini Island, which is becoming a beautiful work with the music of Terry Riley. He's facing us with our dust. And that, I think, it's, I mean, for me, it's a lot of things which happens with a lot of great artists. For example, in the beginning paintings, there's some dust in the paintings, dust with the powder in the case of Hélène Delprat, or dust with the blood on the Hélène Gallagher. All the people I work with, the artists, they are dust. We are with the dark side. We are with the bad smell. I think I discussed a long time ago, about 25 years ago, when I was running a small public space in Paris with Boltanski, to try to do a show just about bad taste, to free from being seductive, and that's it. Muna, you want? But thanks for the words.
I mean, yeah, it's, you know, life is messy. I agree. And artists have a way to show that. And, you know, another work that really speaks to that is AJ's, Arthur Jaffe's Love is the Message. You know, once you start to really look at the show, you realize we're really going subterranean here. We're going to the sort of guts and bowels of life, you know, and in all its sort of ugly beauty in a way. And the idea of doing a clean show was not at all on our radar. I mean, it was all about, you know, showing the complication, and, you know, the messiness of life.
Questions. I'd like to thank you. Thanks, Angela, for coming back to us, coming to the Teatrino. Thank you very much. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Muna. Thank you. Thank you to the artists who made it to be with us. Many more would have loved to join, but unfortunately, because of the restrictions, they couldn't be with us. And we're going to be here again tomorrow. And for the time being, thank you very much for being with us.